The voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the city like a cry in the middle of silence, and it stopped David Whittaker in his tracks. He had just left the courthouse after a long day of hearings. A rough case, a guilty verdict, an angry client. One of those days that made him wonder if any of it was even worth it. He was headed to his usual coffee shop, lost in his thoughts, when he heard that voice. And then he saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, standing just behind the rusted iron fence of St. Agnes Orphanage. Her dress was faded yellow, her hair tied up in uneven pigtails. Her small hands gripped the fence tightly, as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded in this world. But it was her eyes that hit him the hardest. Big, dark, and filled with a hope so raw it made his chest ache. David had never planned on becoming a father. He'd spent most of his childhood in foster care, bouncing from one home to another, never belonging, never staying. That experience taught him to be independent, to protect himself, and most of all, not to get too close. That's part of why his marriage didn't last. He wasn't the dad type. At least, that's what he believed. But now, here was this little girl, asking him to pretend, to play a role he'd always run from. He walked up to the fence, knelt down to her level, and asked gently, "What's your name?" "Amelia," she replied softly. "But the sisters call me Millie." "And why do you want me to pretend to be your dad?" She looked down for a second, then up again, straight into his eyes. "Tomorrow is family day at the orphanage. Some kids have people coming. Fake aunts, older cousins, someone to visit. But I never have anyone. Sister Josephine says if no one comes, I'll have to spend it alone." Again, that last word hit him hard again. There was no bitterness in her voice, no tears, just quiet resignation, the kind that only comes from repeated disappointment. David sat beside the fence for almost an hour, talking to her. She liked drawing. She loved dogs but had never owned one. She hated oatmeal but always traded it for apple slices with a boy named Ben in room 4. She had never been to a park, never been read a bedtime story, never had anyone hold her when she was scared. "But that's okay," she added quickly. "Some kids have angels. I have fences." David felt like his heart had shattered. The next morning, he showed up, blue button-down shirt, khaki pants, just like Millie had told him real dads wore. He even brought balloons, 3 of them. 1 red, 1 yellow, 1 blue. When she saw him from the steps of the orphanage, she didn't walk. She didn't hesitate. She ran. Ran straight to him with the biggest smile he had ever seen, like her whole world had just come alive. Sister Josephine came over, clearly confused. "Mr. Whittaker, you're not on Amelia's contact list." "I'm not," he said gently. "She asked me to be her pretend dad for the day, so here I am." The nun didn't say anything more, just nodded quietly and walked away. That day was magic. They played every game in the yard. Millie painted his face like a tiger. He bought her extra cotton candy. She even performed a small poem in front of everyone, her voice trembling at first, until she looked at David, saw his thumbs up, and smiled with the confidence of someone who knew she was finally seen. They sat together, shared stories, and laughed more than David had in years. For one day, she wasn't the orphan behind the fence. She was someone's daughter. And for the first time in a very long time, David felt like he belonged somewhere too. As the sun began to set, the mood shifted. Kids started saying goodbye to their visitors. Some cried, some clung tightly, some just walked away. Millie sat beside David on a bench under a tree, quiet now, her hands folded in her lap. "Did I do okay?" she asked softly. "Was I a good pretend daughter?" David felt his throat tighten. "You were perfect." She gave him a small smile, then stood up. "You can go now," she said. "I don't want you to feel bad when you leave." He stood up too. "Millie, do you want me to come back?" She hesitated, nodded. "Yes, but not as a pretend dad. I want you to come back, for real." Her voice dropped even lower. "But I know that's not how life works. Some kids get angels, some just get fences." And with that, she walked back inside. That night, David couldn't sleep. He stared at his empty apartment, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the stillness of a life without color. He looked at the dusty photo frames on the shelves, pictures of people he barely called anymore, and all he could see in his mind was a little girl in a yellow dress asking him to stay. Over the next few weeks, he visited her, sometimes at the fence, sometimes inside. He brought sketchbooks, snacks, stories. She started calling him Mr. David. He started calling her Sunshine. They became something, not quite family, not quite strangers, something in between, until one rainy Tuesday he arrived. Millie wasn't there. Sister Josephine met him at the gate. Her eyes were red. "She's been moved," she said. "A family came in, a well-connected couple. Fast-tracked the adoption. She's gone." David's heart dropped. "Did she want to go?" he asked. "She didn't have a choice." The sister replied quietly. "But she left you this." She handed him a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing, A tall man in a blue shirt, a little girl in yellow, holding hands. Behind them, a big fence with a red X over it. At the bottom, written in shaky letters, "Thank you for pretending. I'll never forget that someone chose me, even if it was just for one day." But the story doesn't end there. David filed for custody. He hired lawyers, appealed to the courts, argued with agencies. He had spent his whole life defending others, but this was the first time he was fighting for himself. Fighting for her, it took months. Paperwork, hearings, delays. But finally, one snowy December evening, a letter arrived. Adoption approved. He went straight to the McAllister's home, the family who had adopted Millie. They were kind, surprised, and a little confused. But before they could say anything, Millie came running down the hall. "Daddy!" she screamed. "My real daddy came back." She threw her arms around him, holding him tighter than she ever had before. This time there was no fence, no pretending. This time it was real. Today, David tells this story across the country, at foster parent conferences, at child advocacy centers, on podcasts, on stages, and every time he ends with the same words: you don't have to be perfect to be a parent. You just have to show up, even if it starts as pretend. Sometimes that's how real love begins. And beside him on those stages, a teenage girl with a bright yellow scarf and a heart full of fire. Her name is Amelia Wetacre. She still loves dogs, and she's never been behind a fence again. Moral of the story: sometimes love begins with a whisper, a small question, a single moment of courage. And sometimes all it takes to change someone's life forever is one day where someone says, "You matter to me."